Hello, and welcome to this session on industrial energy efficiency, the path to decarbonisation. I think over the last many years, we've seen lots of discussion around energy efficiency, around the potential, the latent potential for energy efficiency, the positive economic benefits. And we know that energy efficiency is very much front and centre of long-term climate plans really across the globe. We see it in the US, we see it in Europe, we see it in Asia. However, when we look at the implementation, then we're not necessarily seeing the degree of energy saving that we would anticipate. And really that, I think, is at the core of the question that we're going to address today. What is the true potential? Why aren't we seeing the levels of investment and energy saving that was potentially anticipated? I'm really pleased to have 4 panelists here today who hopefully will help us investigate that topic over the next 40 minutes. Really interesting panel who are very much active in the area. So if we could just start maybe by introducing the panel, then a few minutes of discussion, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So please think about the questions that you want to ask towards the end of the session. So if I could just start by introducing people, please. So Paolo Bertuzzi, the Chief Executive of Turboden. Knittel, sorry, I apologize, Professor of Economics at MIT. Pratima sorry, I apologize.
Rangarajan.
Chief Executive Officer of OGCI. Climate Investments, and Peter Zornio, Chief Technology Officer of Emerson. So maybe, Pratima, if we could start with you. And I think we saw the OGCI Venture Day yesterday, so if maybe we could start with your perception about energy efficiency and what potential it has in the industrial space.
I think you said it right when you said it is critical to achieve our global climate goals. So if we think about keeping our temperature rise to less than 2 degrees C by 2040, that's our minimum goal. All the models tell us that energy efficiency is critical for it. The reason we focus on the energy and the industrial sectors is because those sectors are responsible for 30 billion tons of CO2 a year, just to get us the things that we use every day, transport, chairs, the things that we use. And I think what's actually kind of tragic is that the energy that we generate to run those systems, 2/3 of that energy actually is wasted because of process inefficiencies. So you have all the CO2, and 2/3 is for products or is for stuff that we don't actually use. So I think the potential is enormous. And just to give a little bit of maybe human perspective, that's like going to the grocery store, buying 3 bags of food and throwing 2 out of your car window before you get home. It doesn't feel right, and yet we do practice that. And we did when we look at it, if we actually could capture maybe one of those bags of energy back, that actually takes us halfway to what we need to do to get to 2 degrees C, to the delta of 2 degrees C by 2040. So that's pretty powerful.
Very powerful. I think what would be good now is to think about some of the technologies that can be applied. And Paolo, could you maybe explain a bit about what Turboden are doing and how it plays into the energy efficiency agenda?
Yes, thank you. Turboden is an Italian company established in 1980 and is part of MHI, Mitsubishi Heavy Industry Group, since 2013. What we do, we design and we supply a solution based on organic Rankine cycle technology that is a turbo generator similar to conventional steam turbine, but we use organic Rankine fluid. The difference is that we can produce power also capturing low temperature heat, and we have 380 units in operation. Most of them are in biomass cogeneration, others are in geothermal application, and also waste heat recovery project. This last part is more linked to energy efficiency. And typically we can produce power from a stream of exhaust heat coming both from intensive energy industry, such as cement, glass, iron and steel, or from oil and gas, especially in waste recovery projects to power from a gas turbine used to run a compressor. There are many in the world. This is the focus of and the size of our unit is from a few hundred kilowatt up to 20 megawatt. So this is our focus.
So I think effectively you're capturing one of Pratima's bags of wasted energy, and potentially, Peter, can you capture the other bag through the automation angle?
So we've done a lot at Emerson in actually following the old adage that you can't control what you can't measure. We've invested in a number of sensors so that at least you have a good picture of your energy utilization. A lot of times people really don't know or have instrumented, for instance, the electrical consumption of big pieces of equipment that are in a plant. Steam systems are prevalent in almost in every industrial process. We've developed some specialized wireless sensors that actually can detect and listen to failed steam traps and steam leaks. We also have the complete set of software that goes along with that. So energy management information systems, so that you can get a view of all that energy consumption, get a baseline, and then start working on models that actually will predict, where the energy consumption is excessive and where you can go in and reduce it. So we're not as much on the side of providing the new processes or more efficient processes. We're much more about looking at where you're consuming energy with the processes you have today and optimizing that energy consumption that you're doing with those more conventional kind of processes that everyone has. I would say that having tried to be a supplier of that to the industry for a long time, it's not always the easiest thing because it's still typically very economically driven, right? So it can be very geographic. If you're talking to somebody in Singapore or Germany where energy prices are very high, then they're excited because they see an economic return from doing energy type projects. If you're talking to somebody in the Middle East, you may not get the same reaction because the fundamental energy costs are so much lower. So another thing that we've done recently is we've actually come up with a whole new way of trying to get a bigger picture tracking of the wall-to-wall energy usage in a facility. Working with Cambridge University, we've come up with this approach that we call resource efficiency that kind of calculates in not just the energy flows, but it actually applies sort of an energy value to the materials that are consumed inside of a process as well, so that you actually are able to see as you are wasting materials or using a lower impact energy material than a high impact energy material, you get more of a wall-to-wall look at what's happening inside your process. And that's part of the effort there, is to get manufacturers to be more excited about energy, to use that more as a proxy for what their overall plant production and efficiency is. So got a lot of things cooking on trying to make today's existing plants more efficient.
Thank you very much. And I think, Christopher, you're looking at measuring energy efficiency, is that right? And through the work that you're doing in the Energy Research and ETV Institute, so you maybe pick up on that for a minute?
So at MIT, I run what's known as the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research. And a few years back, we combined forces with UC Berkeley and University of Chicago to study energy efficiency. And really the motivation is that it's this huge puzzle, right? It's that if you look at any climate action plan, usually upwards of 50% of the CO2 savings are going to come from energy efficiency. You ask yourself why, and the main motivation why is we have things like the McKinsey curve that says energy efficiency is not only zero cost, it's negative cost. And so we're a group of economists, and whenever we see $100 bills on the floor not being picked up, we get a little skeptical, and maybe they're there, and if they are there, we want to understand why nobody's picking them up. So what the E2E project is all about is actually doing randomized control trials on energy efficiency. So we go out in the field, team up with companies like Emerson. We're teaming up with one sub-metering company right now, where we go out and just like you would test the blood pressure medicine, you get 100 manufacturing facilities, you give 50 of them the drug, the energy efficiency sub-metering drug. You have random 50 that don't get the drug, and you look to see what the real world savings are. And to be clear, most of our experiments have been in the residential space so far, because at least in the US, we spent a lot of money on energy efficiency in the residential space, but we do have commercial and industrial randomized control trials. And what I'll say is, at least, again, most of the evidence is on the residential side. A lot of times, the savings that we thought are there, or we think are there, aren't actually there. So a number of our randomized control trials find that we're actually only getting about half the savings of what the engineers think we're going to get. And it's not rebound. It's not that we're changing our thermostats. It's just a lot of times we think we can do it better. We think it's cheaper than it really is, and we think that it's saving more. So that's what really motivates us, because if we're going to save the world on the back of energy efficiency, and only half of the savings are actually there, guess what? We're not going to get to 2 degrees. We're going to blow right through 2 degrees. So that's basically the research plan of the EDE project. We've run 20 or so of these experiments, and we're always looking to run more.
Fantastic. So I think when you're really picking up on the same point, a lot of people around what the barriers to energy efficiency. So I mean, I think what we really see as the biggest barriers in terms, I mean, obviously some people are investing in energy efficiency, the projects that you're doing in Emerson and Turboden, but there clearly are still substantial barriers to deployment. So I mean, is there a single solution that would drive energy efficiency forward? Or I mean, Pratima, is there any sort of...
You know, I haven't seen the placebo effect. I'll go home and read the paper if you have one. But I think if I look at industrial systems, transport is shown to be less than 20% efficient. So there's a lot of, from an industrial, I don't know very much about consumer, I think there's a lot of potential. But there's a couple of things that prevent us from doing it, right? One is typically you have to change the mechanics, so there's a technological piece. But there's also a human piece. You have to change how you operate, and we've always shown that that is sometimes a harder piece. But there's a third one that I think really is what is the killer of the deal, which is it's not sexy, right? The person who finds that little energy efficiency something in the plant doesn't get their face up as the new product manager, right? And that does drive people. So I think the analogy I would draw is it's a bit like safety used to be, right? It wasn't sexy. It was something you must do. And we drove that safety culture from the top down in industries. We said, look, this is important. And we've made enormous progress in safety. I think similarly, if we really want to drive emissions, whether it's through efficiency or other methods, we have to drive a low emissions culture. And we have to get it into our DNA, just like we did safety. So that really, to me, is what determines if we're serious or not about solving the problem. And once you do that, we've always reacted. We get it done.
So I think it's about culture rather than economics, or is there do we need economic drivers as well, potentially? I mean, is that what you're seeing in Emerson, that there's a...
Yeah, so I think it's some of both. So I think a good example is, I think everybody's pretty proud right now of the progress that's been made in renewables, for instance. And at least from my perspective, when I look at renewables and what percentage of generation it is right now, it wasn't, people did it not just from a cultural right thing to do. We primed the pump with some pretty good incentives, at least in the United States. And I think legislation, we can argue all day whether a carbon tax or whatever is the right approach or carbon's the right metric, but some sort of legislation and economic incentives are probably going to be required here to get things going and to get industry moving in such a direction that it becomes more of that cultural thing above and beyond just it's the right thing to do, or it proves out to be economically the best thing to do versus some kind of process improvement or any other kind of capital investment that a process could be doing to improve performance.
Yeah, if I could just add, it has to be something other than just economics that's keeping it from happening. If we take the McKinsey curve as factual, if there are actual negative cost things that just aren't being done, a carbon tax isn't necessarily going to force somebody to pick up the bill, the $100 bills. What it's saying, and this is something that we're trying to investigate, is that there are often within an organization impediments to energy efficiency. It might be because it's not sexy, or it might be because the plant manager, his or her bonus at the end of the year is based on throughput, not on energy use, right? Or it could be that we're selling it to the wrong people. So when we go to do these randomized control trials, one experiment we're trying to run right now is, should you tell the CFO or should you tell the plant manager? Where in the organization should you be selling this new energy efficiency device? And that's something I think that we just don't know the answer to. And then that'll feed back to what the right set of policies are to get those $100 bills to be picked up. Because again, it's not necessarily a carbon tax. And believe it or not, my license plate is tax CO2. So I'm all in favor of a carbon tax. But in this setting, if the McKinsey, and it's true, I have pictures if you want. In this setting, if the McKinsey curve is correct, then a carbon tax isn't gonna be enough. It's still necessary, but just not sufficient.
So then I think really you're saying that it's not a technical issue, it really is a cultural issue, which in a way is presumably slightly more difficult to solve. But I think, Paolo, you had some samples of real concrete barriers that you're seeing to the deployment of energy efficiency as well.
Yes, our point of view is very specific because it's not energy efficiency in general, but is power production from waste heat that is a part of energy efficiency. What I see is that in the energy-intensive industries, energy manager and CFO are very careful, and in that area they are doing a lot in energy efficiency when price give the good remuneration of this. Sometimes, in any case, you need long-term vision because the payback of these projects is not short as other energy efficiency solution, but typically in energy-intensive company, the behavior is toward this solution. Okay, in oil and gas, company is a little bit different. There are specific barriers. One is that typically oil and gas company cannot sell power due to the rules. So in case they produce more than their own consumption, they cannot dispatch to the grid. This is a limit that really limit the number of projects. The second one is that the market, the sector is very fragmented in terms of upstream, midstream, transport, and downstream. So there is not a real incentive from the single company, for example, to reduce the amount of gas that is used during the transport, because they only transport and the gas is not owned by them. So you need to look this from a system point of view and give a target of saving to each company. So these rules that has been done correctly probably for other reason, then in practice limit the interest of the single company to implement a solution. So not only price and carbon price, of course, can help, but also the rules should be studied in order to increase the interest of the specific company to implement project.
What one measure do we think then that we need to bring in if we've got this cultural problem? How is this something that we can? Is it something that we can address? Is it something that's addressed by industry? Is it something that needs to be addressed by government? What's the sort of area where we think that we could see the biggest change? Is there one sort of single measure?
Well, go ahead.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we actually are trying to drive something in that direction. We're working with different governments to try to get this idea of a combined look, this metric that we call resource efficiency, which is based on a thermodynamic principle called exergy, as a way to look at kind of a combined overall energy impact of a facility, with the hope being that then that will drive additional sort of incentive, financial incentive, because it'll be more of an accurate overall production output efficiency of a facility, rather than just having it viewed as like, okay, energy efficiency, that would be a nice thing to do. It's green, it's good for the environment, but I'm still going to measure it just based on, you know, on what the financials are, which is always a tough hill to climb in a for-profit corporation, right? So that's our approach, is to try to do that with a particular measure that we're trying to actually talk to governments now about, something that could be adopted and could be promoted to companies as something that would be measured.
And then presumably reported as well,
Correct.
and be able to be visible to consumers as well. And on sorry, please.
I might take a slight, I think we all have to do everything that we're all doing. But I just tell you something that we did this week is OGCI Climate Investments. We had a venture day. We had a competition, you were there, where we actually invited 11 companies to come in and pitch. We put $50 million of prize money out there, and we'll keep adding if we find more technologies and companies. But our goal, we don't actually win until these technologies actually get implemented and we see impact. So not only will we give out the prize money to these innovators as they get selected, we will also use our member companies, and we have 13 major oil and gas companies as our members. We'll work with Emerson, we'll work with anybody to try to get them implemented. And what we really want to do is try to catalyze, get capital markets engaged by showing that we can do this and drive profitable and good business practices. So we're really open to collaboration. I'll keep advertising that because it is a collaborative journey.
And do you think you're seeing a change in view from your member companies in terms of more of a focus on energy efficiency in their industrial processes? Or?
Absolutely. You're going to hear more about it from us this year, but definitely our companies are looking at their CO2 intensity, they're thinking about this, and the more we can do to raise the awareness, the better.
So is energy efficiency sexy yet? What more do we need to do to make it the exciting one? It is now after yesterday.
Yes, we had 11 sexy companies. Definitely sexy.
So that's maybe addressed a lot of the challenges. So I mean, Chris, you were mentioning on the residential side, but do you see barriers on the industrial side that are?
Yeah, so we're diving into that now. One experiment that we're running in California is just wrapping up. Again, we had 100 facilities, and they each got the pill, but we randomized when they got the pill, and that mimics a randomized control trial. But the next phase of that experiment, so we've studied what the savings are. I can't tell you because it's going to ruin the second stage. But then the next stage is to go to those 100 companies and say, look, this device saved you X% of energy, and randomly offer them the device again at different prices. And then go to another 100 companies that never took the pill and randomly offer the device to them to see what the demand curve basically is. And what that's going to tell us is how much more are you willing to pay after you've actually experienced the service, right? And we're also going to have a third group where we say, hey, did you know these MIT researchers found that this saves X? Now how much are you willing to pay? So then that tells us what information does to how much people are willing to pay. And at the end of the experiment, that'll tell us something about what the barriers are. Because if they're not willing to pay up to the energy savings of what they've already experienced, then that tells us there's some hidden cost to energy efficiency, or at least this pill, that we're not factoring into this analysis. So the next phase is then to go to Emerson and say, get rid of this hidden cost, or think about ways to reduce that hidden cost.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that solutions are available also at proven and also at a competitive price. For example, we can offer some solution in terms of $3 per kilowatt hour LCOA. That is a very good number compared also with other renewables. Probably energy efficiency is not sexy as renewables, and so does not have a priority dispatch. And I don't know how much the company really prioritize their investment in terms of capex per avoided ton of CO2. Probably they also need to develop metrics to evaluate investment, not only in terms of IRR, but also in terms of with some approved method of investment prioritization. And probably this is something that still need to arrive in the industry and the business.
I think one thing we have talked about so far is we've been talking about incentives for energy efficiency. I think there's obviously, we can look the other way as well and think about a stick a little bit. And, when we see energy efficiency targets and limits on consumption, do you see that it really has to be incentivized, or do you think there's potential for intervention in terms of governments trying to limit emissions, or is it really all about carrots? I think, I suppose, carbon pricing, I suppose, would be a very good example of a stick, maybe, in some ways. But is there any other measures that could be taken?
Well, historically, we've had many instances of standards, right? We have minimum efficiency standards. We phased out, or we started to phase out incandescent light bulbs, and then we backed off of that. So I think there is room for those carrots. I don't know if we have a good handle on whether or not the stick is more effective than the carrot, and vice versa.
If I could comment, because Chris reminded me of something, and it kind of feeds right into what Pratima said earlier about this being a cultural thing. So as we develop products and technology, I have this adage I use all the time, which is people like diet pills. They don't like exercise machines, okay? Everybody knows what it takes to stay in shape, right? Eat right, don't, change your diet, get on the exercise machines. Sounds like work. A lot of the stuff that we do today in energy efficiency, a lot of, frankly, the tools and technology we offer require customers to put them in, maintain them, keep the applications going. If you want this to go faster, I think more of the diet pills, like you described, process change equipment, like Paolo has, where it's a fundamental technology shift that you install one time that does a big jump immediately on putting some of the oranges back in the grocery bag, in terms of the energy that was wasted. So one of the other approaches we've taken is to say, okay, even if it's something like an energy management system or advanced control application is going to keep things going, we'll install it, we'll run it, we'll operate it for you, we'll offer it to you as a service, because a lot of times the last things people in these plants want is more things that they have to take care of, more software applications that need to be kept up to date, more sensors, more people that have to be put in place to run them. So that's another, I'd say, cultural kind of thing that can help move this along, and we're moving more to that kind of a business model to try to encourage people to do this, because then it becomes a very simple contract of, here's a monthly fee, here's the energy savings, the math is easy, right? Maybe it's not a $100 bill, hopefully it's a $100,000 bill that we're sticking on the floor for them to pick up.
And add to it, and your neighbor did it better.
Yes, that is a huge one, yes. In utility pricing, they learn that if they show you your neighbor is doing better than you are, then you're much more motivated to do it. Exactly.
Fantastic, so a bit of competition. Sorry, was there?
No,
but the business model is very important, how to propose this to customer, and I think that if you can give as a service, not as a CapEx, this improve. But also from this point of view, IFRS accounting rules sometimes do not help, because it's very complicated to have off-balance sheet solution. And then sometimes when the companies are very big, it's also different to implement a system to have your device in their premises. So in principle, it's okay, but then it's difficult to implement this business model in practice.
Okay. Thank you very much. So should we maybe just open up to questions from the floor? I think there's a couple of microphones, so.
I would like to bring this global perspective to the discussion a little bit. As the IEA director was referring yesterday, it just takes about 3 times of energy to have the same level of cool comfortness in India than in Japan. So, in terms of both sticks and carrots, what's your experience and what's your comment about pushing industrial energy efficiency in developing world?
I think it's really important. I mean, a lot of the growth is going to be seen in Asia. If you look at CAGRs, in a lot of the industrial systems, it's the growth in India is going to be huge. China starts at a very high base, and we continue. And in fact, yesterday when people were presenting to us, I think half the question, I must have asked almost every company, how it would translate to Asia. I think the cultural norms are different, as well as the government regulations are different. We have to look at each one as a separate challenge or opportunity. But the opportunity right now in Asia is the amount of new build. So if we could get these technologies and take them, it's so much easier to get it into new build than it is to refurbish. And I think that is one reason this energy efficiency is critical for Asia. So I think that's really where we have to focus, as well as what we do here naturally. I think the LED story in India is fabulous.
Yeah, I didn't hear that story, but I'll just say that we often think both India and China are ripe for those $100 bills being on the ground. Just to give some context, one of my colleagues, Namrata Kala, has a paper where she went into industrial or textile companies and replaced the CFLs with LEDs. And she was able to measure the energy efficiency gains from that, but guess what? The actual productivity benefits from reducing the heat that's falling on the textile workers were 10 times larger than the energy savings, right? So that's another one where this company had no idea that was the case. Once they told her that, or once she told them that, guess what? All the facilities have LEDs now. Right?
Yeah,
So
and it comes back to if you don't measure it, right, as you said, you won't do anything to change it. And so it's really important for us to do this educational process as we go on that journey.
You know, on buildings, so the other half of Emerson is the leading supplier of compressors that go in the world, that go into air conditioning units and stuff. And there's an example, I'd say, where government regulation, CERA efficiency, has continued. That number has just continued to ramp up and up and up. We actually like it because it forces us to get better and better and better and higher efficiency, compressors. And frankly, it keeps low technology competitors out of the market. And so that's a place where I think you can see where legislation around energy efficiency has had a big impact.
I think there was another question at the back as well. Was there? Please.
Hi, my name is Paul Schwartz. I'm one of the companies that was with OGCI yesterday. At the C-suite level, where are the people running down the hallways for energy efficiency?
well, you would certainly hope the CFO would. It goes to the bottom line. Although I'll say one barrier, often the IRR of energy efficiency might be 8%, but they have something else that's 10%, and they're capital constrained. So it's not clear that it's always the right decision, even if it actually is saving money. I think that's something that we need a better handle on.
Yeah, so back when oil was $120 a barrel, and you ran your plant based on oil, they were running down the hallway on energy efficiency, okay? As the price of oil and gas, which is, two of the major fuels that are used in industrial, back down, they're not running so much, again, because it's largely an economically driven thing today. So that's why we've been having this discussion about, is that going to be good enough to make it happen?
But I think the CFO is key, but it's also the comment you made about sometimes the CapEx is the barrier, and is it possible to do a services model? And then that allows us to get over some of these humps of the 8 or 10% return.
But Paolo's correct. Most of the people we try to sell to are so predisposed to the capital model and like to own things that it's chipping away at that. The whole conversation around IoT and people moving to services is gradually transforming the mindset to being more willing to being open to those service kind of things. But it's tough to get these kinds of companies to accept that financial model.
Yes.
And the tough thing about that financial model is the measurement, right? Because you need to know what you would have consumed if I didn't install this thing.
Exactly. Right? So it's doing the right baselining and really getting agreement on what you're going to be credited for, and then that becomes a debate. But once you can get that settled, then it becomes a good business model.
But let's not forget, in many ways, Solar City's big innovation was just a contract.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what.
Yeah.
And if there's space here for companies that only offer some new idea about contracts to be very successful in energy efficiency.
Yeah.
Another topic is also the visibility of the rules, because these investments are capex demanding, and so they have a long payback time, or relatively long. So if you are a company energy intensive, first of all, you need to be sure that you will be still working with the same volume, the same load in future. So the visibility on your plan impact the return. And second, the rules. The rules on the energy efficiency are not stable, are different country by country, and are still under development. So you don't know if the rules will remain. In Italy, for example, now we have a good mechanism, but every year you don't know if this mechanism will remain or not. So sometimes it's better to have maybe a lower incentive, but for a longer period. So at least to cover the 5, 6, 7 years of the payback time that you need.
Fantastic. So I think we're looking at an ecosystem being developed, with
Yes.
measurement, with stability, with a whole set of framework around energy efficiency.
So one last point on that, what we have seen, and with the metrics, is when you're confident enough in your solution to go in to be willing to sign up for such a contract, then they're more likely to actually say, okay, we'll make the capital investment.
Good.
You know, because they're like, well, if this guy's so confident that he's willing to put
I
his
can
money,
do by myself.
I'll take all the benefit, right? Why do I want to share any of it with him? Because if nothing else, it shows the confidence you have in the solution that you're providing.
Yes, this is exactly what is happening. Yes.
Yeah. So are there some other questions? On the floor? Please, I think there's a microphone there.
I think we've kind of generally discussed the kind of behavioural, cultural aspects of energy saving. Just, I'm interested in your thoughts in terms of the kind of generational impact and the differences between generations and experience which will drive this going forward. And do you see a tipping point at any point in the future?
So,
Try
Generations in terms of
the young.
so are younger people more
Yeah.
disposed to energy efficiency? I think.
Well,
that's maybe-
you know, I just finished a paper. You know, it's often believed that millennials are just different, right? And so in this paper, we test that empirically, looking at whether millennials are more or less likely to own vehicles and how many miles millennials drive compared to past generations. And what we actually find is that there's actually no difference. It sure looked like millennials were different in 2008, but guess what? There was something called the Great Recession in 2008. So, you know, I don't know if we could just trust the next generation to just want to do these things. I think you need the right incentives, you need the right carrots, and you need the right sticks. At our hearts, we're all economic beings. Now, I'm an economist, so of course I'll say that. But so if you don't have the right carrots and sticks, I'm not sure the next generation is just going to magically fix things.
My kids don't turn off the lights.
Does anyone's? Okay. So please, question.
Jim Tucker, geologist. You've talked about the industrial setting and where there's profit and loss and there's profit centers and cost centers, and so it's much easier in one sense to balance where you spend your money and how you spend your money. In the governmental and municipal, state, whatever setting, where everything is a cost and any benefit is qualitative rather than quantitative, do you have any experience in how to infect government agencies or municipalities or whatever so that they, going forward, see these as benefits that they ought to consider and hopefully adopt? Thank you.
So maybe we can turn the question around slightly and think about often energy efficiency looks first at the public sector. Do we see that as being an area where we might see leading best practice in the public sector for energy efficiency, or is not significantly different from the rest of the economy?
Well, so I'll contrast, because I went to the session last night on plastics, which was very interesting because there you saw in the space of a year, due to some very impactful, dramatic photos and press about all the plastic pollution and all the finding plastic in sea creatures everywhere and all the damage from that. That is like a very, very real. The gal from Pepsi called it a crisis, in the plastics industry right now because people are demanding immediate action because of, the sheer sort of visceral impact of those images and everybody sort of visualizing what's happening. The problem with carbonization is we're the frogs in the pot, if you're familiar with that old expression, right? Where the temperature's just going up slowly enough that no one's seeing the visceral impact, I think, that's going to drive the public opinion kind of stuff to put the pressure necessary on legislators, because then you see more of the pushback on, well, this means I'm going to pay more for my electricity, or I'm going to pay more for my, so it's really going to have to be, we're going to have a conscience to some degree, from my opinion, to actually make this go. You're in the middle of this, Pratima, so.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You can't see it happen, and it is happening gradually, and human beings notice contrast, right? I mean, you see the fuel price go up, suddenly everyone's filling the trains. I used to live in LA, the only person taking the train into work. And they'd fill the trains, and 3 weeks later, fuel prices still up. The lemmings have left. And so I think it's either a stick or a carrot, but it has to be a conscious incentivization. We need leaders. I don't think it makes a difference if it's public sector, private sector, us as heads of families. We need leadership in this, and we have to commit to it. Yesterday, I just heard, we heard from Ernie Moniz, he used to be Secretary of Energy, and he said we have 17 years left in our carbon budget. What can be more dramatic than that? We talk about the energy transition. 17 years in the energy sector ain't a transition anymore. This is a step change. Either we turn around and decide, look for leaders who are willing to step up and drive this from the top down. Otherwise, I don't see it happening. And I don't think it matters actually public or private. It's just human beings.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think we've got time for one final question, if there's anything else.
Maybe something more positive.
Yeah.
I have sexy companies.
That's right.
Brett Perlman, Center for Houston's Future. What areas do you see leading the charge in this area? Maybe that would be a positive way to close the dialogue.
Paolo, do you want to?
I think that the positive way can be that also development countries are taking much more attention to environmental issue because it's becoming a real problem also in their country, and probably investing in that countries pays more from a CO2 reduction point of view because the efficiency of the process is less. So you can invest in the same money, you obtain more, and probably we need to leverage this aspect from an overall system point of view.
Fantastic. I just thought we left with quite a positive message. I think we've heard some discussion of the cultural change that we need, the fact that we've got measurement that allows us to understand why energy efficiency is important, and a real interest from the financial community. So I think it's really very positive end to session. So please join me in thanking the panel for this inaugural discussion of energy efficiency.